was. But once we felt like we had a comfortable amount, we then started taking the rent for the month minus what we would owe for taxes and put that down on the mortgage every month. So we were putting down about an extra $1,000 a month on the mortgage because we were getting paid about almost 1,600.
Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Shaun Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights, or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, or maybe you're trying to figure out housing to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life.
The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional.
I'm super excited to have Mason Gomes on the podcast today. Mason and I have chatted back and forth via Instagram. He is at Budget Teacher on Instagram, X, and Threads. And he's just got a wealth of information that he's been putting out. And as a teacher, of course, he's got fantastic teacher-based content. He's an elementary teacher, and he's in Canada. So we got the Canadian perspective coming in. But more importantly, for our discussion today, he's also a former landlord with 6 years of house hacking experience. And that is what we're going to be talking about. So excited to get all this information just downloaded into our brains. Mason, welcome to the show.
Don, thanks so much for having me.
All right, so Mason, can you start by explaining what we mean by house hacking and then how that would help someone towards accelerating their financial growth?
Absolutely. So I'll give you, I guess my definition of house hacking is anytime you're using your primary residence and you're, earning rental income while you live in it. So that could be renting out, any part of the property, whether it's like a garage, a bedroom, a granny suite, a unit in a duplex, etc. And by renting out any part of that property, essentially you're kind of reducing that largest fixed cost that we have, which is housing, and you're using it to create an additional stream of income. The great thing is that you get to decide what to do with the money. So if you want to pay down your mortgage, fund renovations, build an emergency fund, buy stock, etc.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's important to point out that it's any part of the property. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because people think, house hacking, and the traditional house hack, I guess, is, you live in one side of a duplex and you rent out the other side.
For sure.
Own the duplex, and you're using that other side of the rental to offset your costs. And some people say, I can't live in a duplex, or I don't want to live in a duplex. Or there's even, the more extreme, like you live in one bedroom and you rent out the others, and you say, nope, not doing the roommate thing. But there's so many different ways that you can get rental income. You mentioned the garage, right? Storage space. You can rent that out on websites like neighbor.com, which I use. I've used it a few times to rent places out. So I have some land, and I rent out some parking space to a bus on some land I have using neighbor.com. And it's just basically free money. It's not like I'm using that little spot of land in particular. So having just itty bitty things that I can do to house hack, it offsets not very much in this case, but it offsets my cost a little bit by trying to turn my house into an asset more than just a liability.
Absolutely. And all those little bits add up over time, right? So
yeah, for sure. Okay, so you are house hacking for 6 years. How did you get started doing that? And what kind of house hack did you have?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, I guess I was just interested in it. I wanted to, I was looking for ways to accelerate my path to financial stability. I was in university, broke student, the whole, the usual story. So I started reading books, reading articles online, watching videos. I went out to like a couple, we called them like meetups here in Ontario, where, you just join a Facebook group and once a month, like-minded individuals who are investing in real estate get together and talk. So I went to a few of those and talked to some experienced people and kind of just pick their brains a bit. Um, and I started, so I got into it by renting out a bedroom from our house. So it would have been 2018. My wife and I had been working for almost our first year of teaching. She's a teacher too. And so we've both been working almost a year. We saved up and we wanted to get into the market as quick as possible. So here in Ontario, the minimum is 5% down. I think it's maybe a bit different for you guys in the States. And I was like, the market is increasing faster than we could save at the time. So I was like, we're just doing the minimum. We're going to buy something. We got a semi. We got settled in that semi-detached. And well, a friend of mine was looking for a place to live. So he's like, hey, could I rent a room from you guys? And we were like, yeah, we've got empty bedrooms, sure. So we gave him a really good deal. He's a good friend. Gave him a place to live, and it was nice to just have that little bit of extra money. It was maybe $300 a month, just to kind of like give us a peace of mind. And I think that's what kind of gave me a taste of the benefits of house hacking. So then he lived with us for maybe a year and a half. And then we kind of got into then like, I think around 2020, right? Like COVID happened. He ended up moving in with his girlfriend. And then my wife and I like live on like those real estate websites, and I'm always just like looking at, homes for sale. I'm just interested. And I was looking for multifamily homes because I was like, okay, I'm kind of interested in this now. Deal came up. We found a detached house, bigger yard, and essentially like a self-contained granny suite. So not a full separated duplex, but a self-contained granny suite. We jumped on it and purchased that property because when we ran the numbers, it worked out that the amount we were paying for our semi was actually more than if we bought this more expensive house and rented out the basement unit. We would actually be cash flowing and our expenses would be net less than that other house. So that's kind of how we got into it.
Okay, first of all, I just love the differences in language here. I've never heard of a semi before, and we call it a mother-in-law suite, not a granny suite in
Oh,
America.
okay.
So
There you go.
just for anyone who's wondering what he's talking about, semi-detached kind of makes sense, but just saying a semi, I have no idea what that is. So point is different types of housing, guys, and he's able
Yeah.
to rent out a room or rent out a portion of the house. That's all that we really need to take away from that. If you're really interested, you can look up Canadian housing terms.
Thank you for clarifying.
So you kind of stumbled into this with me. Your friend just needing a place to stay, and then you're like, oh, let's try this on a slightly bigger scale.
Yep.
Do you feel like that was the right choice for you, or should somebody consider like some things before they get into it? Like, is it you kind of stumbled on in, but what should they think about as they're trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean, when I say yeah, like I mean, I stumbled into it, but I was always reading and researching. So yeah, like I kind of fumbled my way in, but I wasn't doing it. I don't know how I want to say that, like blindly. Like I had read and researched it. But there's definitely a lot of important things to consider if you want to get into house hacking. So what I was thinking was when I was looking into getting into house hacking, I always tried to think about like my customer. So if I was going to go into this venture and I was going to, rent out a unit in my house, who I was thinking, who is my ideal tenant and what benefits like would they be looking for? So, that kind of influenced me in like where I was looking in the city. I live in a city called London in Ontario. It's about 2 hours from Toronto. So that kind of affected like where I was looking to buy a house and what was offered. So the house that we bought, um, I was looking for my wife and I to have a bit of space, on the main floor upstairs. It's a bungalow. So it was like 2 bedrooms, oh, sorry, 3 bedrooms upstairs and 1 bathroom. And then the basement unit had 2 bedrooms, like a living room area and a bathroom there. And they both had their own laundry. So I thought like that if I was looking for somewhere to live as a tenant, I thought, would I want to live in that basement unit? And so I tried to keep that in mind. Things like parking, like I said already, location, amenities in the unit, washer, dryer. And when we set up the unit, I made it all inclusive, so the tenants wouldn't have to worry about separate internet or utility bills or anything like that. So we just wanted to make it easy. Um, the other thing I was thinking about, which I kind of touched on recently, was that you want to balance um, what you're looking for in the house hack for your tenants with like your own goals and desires. So my wife and I talked a lot before we finally made the jump, and our discussions revolved around like what are our non-negotiables and what are we willing to sacrifice. So luckily for me, my wife trusted my vision and supported me in the rationale when we were making those decisions.
Yeah, that's really important to have your partner on board. House
For
hacking
sure.
without your partner on board is not going to to happen, or if it is, it's not going to end very well.
It's a
So
recipe for disaster. Yeah.
yeah, because no matter how you slice it, it's going to be some form of an invasion of privacy, right? Even
Yes.
like bus, right? The guy had access to the bus, so even that smallest little type of house hack right there, we had that little bit of invasion of privacy as a result. So how much of an invasion of privacy? You can go with bus version all the way up to you sleep on the couch and rent out all the rooms version, which is
Yeah.
the very intense house hacking.
Yeah.
And it just depends on where you want to be on that scale, but that scale is a scale of invasion of privacy. So just keep that in mind, and you want to keep the sensitivity of your partner on that in mind.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I love that advice about, you know, would I want to live in this place that I'm gonna rent out? Uh, let's say that you found a place, you're ready to buy it. You think that you're found a good spot that a tenant will want to live in. What's the first step someone should take if they're interested in house hacking? Maybe even it's before this. You think you know where you want to go. What's the first thing
Yeah.
that somebody should do when they're wanting to do this?
As I said earlier, I would say like just do your research, right? So I would get to know all of the options available. So I was on those real estate websites searching like what options do I even have if for the area that I'm living in. So the city that I'm living in, look at what I can afford, right? Figure out what we could afford comfortably and look within those parameters first. See first of all if there's anything even realistic, right? And then talk to people who have done it. That's, to me, I feel like is one of the most important things. I don't know about you, but in my experience I found that um, people who like haven't done these things, I find are more willing to give you advice on this stuff even though they have no experience in it, because they hear horror stories in the news or whatever, and I totally get that. But that's why I think it's that much more important to seek out people who have been in this situation and who have taken the path that you want to follow, and talk to them and get their firsthand experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, first thing is to make sure you know what the heck you're doing before you do anything else, right? Usually the first thing people think of, I want to buy a house, I need to talk to a loan officer. That's like
Yeah.
step 7. Okay, so just
Yeah.
getting your market down, right? I bought a property which it's for sale if anyone wants to buy it. And I didn't know the market very well because I was living outside of town, and I was like, it's fine. Hint, it's not fine. But anyway, the point is that you need to do your research first. I'm just learning the hard way all these things that Mason apparently is an expert at for asking other people. So make sure you ask other people and learn wisdom from them instead of trying to brute force it. I can tell you for a fact, it's not a good idea to just, say, I'll figure it out as I go. Ask for help, understand what you're doing. Make sure you follow the advice of the people that you're talking to. All those things are really, really helpful. Are there some criteria that you follow perhaps when you are trying to find a suitable property at House Hack?
So start looking early. I found that when we were looking at it, we kind of wrote down, my wife and I, like a wish list of sorts. So what were we looking for in a property? And again, it should be a combination of what you want for yourself, and then what you are wanting, like on the the rental side, whether that's you want to have a separate garage that you can rent out, or you want to have whatever, a basement unit that you can rent, or the number of units, right? Maybe you want a triplex or a fourplex. And then think about how that aligns with your goals, right? Are you wanting to get a duplex where you live in the basement in the one bedroom and you rent out the bigger unit to get more income, or you enjoy the bigger unit and you rent out the smaller unit and just get a smaller portion, right? It's all kind of you have to really think about what you want to get out of it, and think about your timeline too, right? When my wife and I decided to do it, it was never like we're going to do this forever. It was more so just a temporary means to an end to accelerate our path to, financial stability, and just kind of give us like a leg up in that. The other thing I mentioned was to make sure you run the numbers conservatively. So can you afford the property, but can you afford it like comfortably? I always like to, I don't know about you, Shaun, but I like to build in like a margin of error, or like a cushion for myself, because you definitely don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're scraping by, like especially when you're like looking for a tenant, because I've found from speaking to other people especially that this can lead to rushing to find a tenant, or things like that, and then it's like you choose one that's problematic because you're rushing, and then it leads to more issues long term. So you definitely want the right fit, especially if you're sharing the space.
Yeah, so I wanted to actually circle back to this, that you
Sure.
mentioned, like you're able to buy the more expensive house, but your net expenses were lower. If you
Yep.
didn't have a renter in there, would you
Yeah.
be able to meet that mortgage payment comfortably, uncomfortably? Do you say like, well, I have the person paying, so I can go a bit higher, or do you try and keep it at a place where if I didn't have a tenant, I could survive just fine? The tenant just happens to help.
That's a great question. The mortgage lending rules here in Ontario are strict, so that like I had to be able to afford the property on paper, like by ourselves, my wife and I. So we were, on paper, we were buying it as if we weren't renting it out. And that's what I wanted. We did not buy at the top of our budget anyways. I mean, it was the payment was a sizable jump compared to what we were paying for our semi-detached house. Wanted to make sure I gave the full terminology there. But I knew that we could still comfortably afford it because we had some raises since we first bought. Um, and that helped me take the time that I needed to do it the right way, because I knew, we could afford it at X price. So once we get that income, we'll just be like, it'll just be so much easier after that.
Because if you can't afford it without the tenant, then you're not really pocketing the money. You're just not
Yeah.
spending it. Like, because if you are, I was going to pay this, but now I'm paying less, you're able to use that money elsewhere. But if you are at the top dollar for your expenses with the tenant, then you're not really like saving extra. You get some other benefits of having a house, but unless you are actually spending less money than you would otherwise,
Yeah.
you're not getting the max benefit from house hacking. So I think it's definitely important to have that that incomfortable range, or at least not uncomfortable, right? Like you can afford it
Yes,
very well when there's no tenant in place.
absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of tenants, renting would be a great business if it wasn't for the people, right? That's
Sure.
that's the way you think about it. What advice do you have for managing a tenant, especially if they're living in your house?
Oh man, this is one of the most important questions, Sean. I don't know what it's like where you are in Texas, but the laws for tenant protection here in Ontario, I would say, are like much more favorable to the tenants than they are to landlords. Is it similar in Texas or is it different?
No, Texas is like the least friendly to renters place
Okay.
in the United States of America. But there are plenty of
Okay.
places in America that our listeners might be in that would have probably similar to Ontario. But in
Okay.
Texas, I can say, hey, you didn't pay. I take them to court, and within 30 days, they can be kicked out.
Okay, that makes things a little bit more, it's a little more simple. Here in Ontario, it's a much more complex process. There's so much you have to document and just and be careful to make sure you're following the process or it can bite you in the butt. So, with that being said, like doing your due diligence to me is the absolute most important thing. So following make sure before you even get your tenants that you're following a very thorough screening process to find the tenants that are the right fit, like for you, right? Again, it's different. Like you want to have good people generally, but it also depends. Like if you're house hacking and you're kind of sharing the space, I don't want people that are going to be partying till 2 a.m. every night if they're above or below me and I can hear them, right? It's not the lifestyle that I'm trying to live. So you have to make sure you can kind of mesh and just make sure you have like when you are meeting with your tenants, if you're meeting with them or you're having a property manager, just make sure that you have your expectations and boundaries are very clear and cut and dry for your tenants, but also like for yourself. I find that is I wanted to I mean, maybe it's kind of like teaching, right? Like I wanted to make sure I led by example. So my goal was to always treat my tenants with respect and treat them the way that I would want to be treated. So, we lived on the main floor upstairs. My wife and I were always mindful of, the noise that we would be making or even like our footsteps, right? Like I wasn't trying to bang around and stomp my feet upstairs because I knew, well, if they're downstairs in the basement unit, they're not going to appreciate that. So I tried to think that way in hopes that, they would return the favor and they did for the most part. It worked out quite well.
So you said that having a tenant's like teaching. So do you have like a behavior chart? Like today you're on yellow.
Yeah, maybe that would have helped. I don't know. I should have tried that.
Oh man, okay, awesome. All right, so we were talking about being in a comfortable area, but housing's tricky. There's all sorts of things that can happen.
Yeah.
How important is having an emergency fund or a financial buffer when you start house hacking? If you don't have that in hand, would you recommend just renting until you can, or do you think that because of the financial benefits of house hacking, you should just go for it to try and build your emergency fund? I know it's kind of a tricky question, but what do you think?
Yeah, it is. I think ultimately having an emergency fund is extremely important in any situation, whether you're still living at home with your parents or family members. If you're renting somewhere, you don't necessarily need the emergency fund for home repairs, but it could be that you lose your job or something else happens, right? I think an emergency fund is extremely important to have, and we could probably talk for a whole episode about emergency funds, and I'm sure you have already. It's a big topic, but it's definitely a key to have. I think no matter what situation you're in, it just there's a bunch of factors that affect the size and the amount that you would need. When it comes to renting, I'm not sure. I feel like it depends on your situation. Like my wife and I, when we graduated school, excuse me, we were fortunate enough that my mother and stepfather were living in a town nearby where we were working. So we were kind of working in the big city of London, and they were in like a small town about 20 minutes away. So we lived with them for that first year of working, um, rent free. We just, helped out with some groceries and whatnot, because we did not want to rent, and we had that choice. So it kind of depends. If you have the ability to live at home and you're able to get along with your family and you have that option, I think that's your best bet. Especially nowadays with how expensive things are. But if your only option is renting, then if it is what it is, right? You have to just make the best that you can of whatever situation you're in.
Awesome. All right. So there are lots of things that you can do wrong in almost any form of investment. And
Sure.
house hacking is not an exception. And I feel like there's even more. We mentioned a few of them, but are there any other common challenges or pitfalls that someone might want to just be looking out for? Any rakes they could step on when they're getting into house hacking that you maybe from experience you would tell someone to look for?
I would say similar to building that cushion when I was making those calculations for the mortgage and whatnot, is just you got to be careful that you don't underestimate costs or repairs. So anytime we were doing any sort of repairs or maintenance or things like that, we would always add a buffer. Let's say 10% when you're budgeting for something. So you want to make sure that you're adding that in for whatever it is you're doing, because almost always whenever you're doing any sort of renovations or if something breaks, things usually cost more than you think they're going to, right? So it's always good to plan ahead for that. And as I said previously, rushing, I think, the tenant screening process, especially if you're in a state that favors tenants, as a landlord, you have to be savvy that way, and you need to avoid rushing the tenant screening process, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with having those extra expenses, right? If you have kind of a little bit of wiggle room or slush fund where you can comfortably afford some vacancy in the unit or whatever it is you're renting, to give yourself enough time to find the right tenant, I think that like it's almost like you can't even put a price on that to me. We also purchased an amendment package, like for the Ontario standard lease that we have here. It was through like um, paralegal company. It was about $100, and it had all these additional pieces that we could add to the legal lease that we were having the tenants sign, that kind of gave us more protections as a landlord. So taking those opportunities to invest that little bit extra money or time, I feel like can pay off in huge dividends later on.
Yeah, I mean, if you look up, clauses to add to a lease contract for renting, you will find lots of opinions out there of clauses to
Sure.
add and why. So there are many out there, and you should consider them because they're there for a reason. They're helpful for a reason. So having as many protections in place for you, especially if you're in a place that is not as friendly to landlords, is definitely a big deal.
Yeah, you got to know your market. Absolutely.
And a good tenant and a bad tenant makes all the difference. So the same property I'm talking about, it's a triplex. I've had one tenant that's been there the entire time I've owned it. Great tenant. Love her so much because
Amazing.
she's consistent. She's there. She pays. Another unit has had a consistent overturn of just not great tenants. And I feel like I'm going through the screening process, but sometimes they slip through. So I mean, like, you just got to make sure that you are really, really doing your best to screen them. I mean, this last one, he was fine. He just moved in with his girlfriend, so he was gone. So I mean, like, there's just all sorts of reasons why tenants can be a problem. Having a solid, consistent tenant is great. And one of my favorites. So there's this lady across the street. I wish she was my tenant. She's great. Lady across the street at this place came over to talk to me when I was fixing something, and she said, what do you know? I wasn't fixing. I was waiting for a tenant, a potential tenant, and they were late. And she said, "Nope, they're late for this. they're going to be late to pay you. You should just leave. Right. It's like, that's a good point. So like, yeah, just thinking through those things, like if they're not meeting their commitments even before you meet with them, probably not going to meet them afterwards. So these are the types of red flags that you can look out for, making sure they're on time, they're prompt, they are great, they have a good fit with you, especially if you are house hacking. So just really, really paying attention to those things when you are renting.
And trust your gut, right? Like I feel like that's almost like never steered me wrong, right? Like I feel like you have that, there's something in you that tells you this is a good idea or this is not.
Every time I ignore my gut, I get a gut punch. So
there you go.
So don't do that. And put that on a poster, someone. Every time I ignore my gut, you get a gut punch. That's my inspirational quote for the day.
Love it.
Trademarked. All right. Just a few more questions then for you as we're wrapping up. How have you used house hacking to accelerate your financial independence?
So I'll kind of talk about the kind of two different homes, I guess. So our first one, our semi-detached, we rented out that room. It's a friend of mine, it's a couple $100 a month. It's not like it was, life-changing money or anything, but right from the get-go, we just took that money. We did not do anything with it. We just put it down as lump sum payments on our mortgage right away. And I don't exactly know how it works with you guys in the States, but depending on like what kind of mortgage you have, whether it's like a fixed or a variable, fixed mortgages, the rate doesn't change, and usually you can only put down a lump sum payment like once a year. Whereas we had variable, which is you can put down a lump sum payment as often as you pay your mortgage. So we could do it like once a week essentially. So every time we got that extra money, we just put it right down on the house. When we bought our duplex, basically, similar thing. When we got the rent for that, I think we started off by saving it was like 3 to 4 months worth. We just kind of put the money away into a high interest savings account to kind of build up that slush fund. And then once we had, I don't know what our minimum was, but once we felt like we had a comfortable amount, we then started taking the rent for the month minus what we would owe for taxes and put that down on the mortgage every month. So we were putting down about an extra $1,000 a month on the mortgage because we were getting paid about was it almost 1,600. So we were setting aside some and paying that down. And we did that basically the whole time we had tenants. Obviously used a little bit of the money for some repairs here and there. We were very fortunate though. We didn't have anything majorly catastrophic. Towards the end though, so we actually finished our tenancy. We concluded it in July, mutually. Our tenant, agreed she was moving on to something else. So this calendar year, we decided to use some of the money that we had saved up to help fund some renovations that we really wanted to do that we were putting off for a few years. Because we knew that if we did them this calendar year, then we could write off a portion of those expenses, those renovations on our taxes this year, because a portion of it is going towards the rental unit, right? Whereas if we would have waited till next year when we have no rental income at all, then we wouldn't be able to write anything off.
That's awesome. Tax advantage, also paying down your mortgage to really hit that hard to reduce the interest you're paying on there. Lots of great things that you can do with that extra money. Is there a reason why you chose to attack the mortgage instead of investing it in like the stock market or anything like that?
It's such a good question, and I feel like it's so hard, right? Like, which is the right option? We chose to do that to mitigate risk, because it was to us it felt like a larger mortgage than I guess we were used to. So we wanted to try to knock it down as early as we could. That way, when it came time for renewal, we'd have some more flexibility with payments and whatnot. But on the other hand, with that as well, because we're both teachers, when we get paid automatically, at least in Ontario, like a solid chunk of our pay is invested in towards our pensions, and there's nothing we can do about it. It gets taken off automatically. So we're already investing in that. So in addition to that, my wife and I put a little bit extra away in investments in the market outside of that. So we felt like we were already comfortably investing on that end. So we thought, we wanted to diversify. So if we're investing in that, we can afford to pay down some of the mortgage. And we were glad that we did, because when we bought that house, our interest rate was 1.8% because we bought during COVID. So it was extremely low. But then when rates started going up, as you saw in the States, right? The highest our rate got was 6.5%, while we were here in the house. So our payments fluctuated quite a bit. Rates are coming back down a bit now, and I think we're at 5.25, which is still high for what we've been used to. But for that reason, I'm so glad that we paid down a lot early while we could.
That's fixed rates are pretty normal in the States. So it's very rare that somebody has a variable rate on a mortgage.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like for us, if you have a fixed rate, paying down the mortgage, especially if you have like a 3%, you're like, yeah, I would never really do that. There's
right.
You can get such a better return, but when you're unsure what your rate's going to be, what your payment's going to be next year because of the variable rate, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so just trying to mitigate the risk and trying to just go for a balanced approach to that.
Yeah, awesome. I got 2 more questions for you, the same questions I asked my guests. Number 1, what is your number 1 tip for teachers to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life?
That's the toughest question of the night, Shaun. I don't know if I have anything super profound, but I can only speak for myself. I mean, the little things in life make me happy. I'm a man of simple tastes, so I like going for walks with my wife, reading, playing my instruments. I play guitar and drums, playing volleyball, stuff like that. Things that don't cost a ton of money. I spend money on things that I value, and I basically spend almost nothing on things that I do not value. Like I'm very I know what I want and what I don't want. So that I guess makes it easy for me to budget. And I regularly reflect on what I value and if my spending is aligning with that. And I'm very like c'est la vie, like that's life, focus on what you can. Oh, c'est la vie. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes,
It's French. Okay, it's French, right?
It's probably the only French term that most Americans, other than bon appetit,
Right.
would know. So, but we are not French Canadian around here, so we don't know any other French terms. But that's great.
That's about all the French I know. Yeah, it's just focus on what you can control and just make peace with what you can't. I find life is just easier and more enjoyable that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I mean, like, the simplest things are the most profound. Spend time doing what you love, and don't spend on things that you don't love. I mean, like, that's great. It doesn't have to be, something super deep. Just something simple is perfect. Okay, last question for you then. Someone's interested in what you're doing. Maybe they're a Canadian who's been listening to this American talk for a while, and they're like, I need some, other Canadians to talk to. How can someone get in contact with you if they want to ask you some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said earlier, anybody can reach me on Instagram, Threads, and X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days. Yeah. My handle is @budgetteacher. Or you can email me as well if you want, if you have any questions. I'm always happy to chat. My email is mybudgetteacher@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mason. That was a ton of fun. Now, if you would like to have those links just ready-made for you to find, you can go to teachermoneyshow.com/podcast, and there you'll find the links to the email, the social handles, and you can also get the link to neighbor.com. I'll have a link there if you want to rent out some extra storage space. That's, like I said, that's what I do. So there's just all those links are available for you at teachermoneyshow.com/podcast. Thank you so much, Mason. I've really appreciated talking to you. It's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, Shaun, thanks so much for having me. It was great.
It was a lot of fun having Mason on. I just wanted to take you through my top takeaways from this conversation I had with him about house hacking. So the first most important thing to remember is you can house hack any part of your house, whether you're house hacking most of your house, all of the rooms, and you're just kind of hanging out on the couch, which is what the house hacking king Craig Curlop always did, or if you're house hacking, a duplex, or just giving out a little bit of storage space. I use neighbor.com for that, and I highly recommend that you use the link that I provide in the show notes if you would like to sign up for neighbor.com as a place for you to rent out some space. And I've also, on the land that I own, I used HipCamp. HipCamp is a website where you can basically say, my land is now a campsite, and I'll have a link for that on the show notes as well. I know that's not something that most everyone's going to be able to use, but if you're interested, those are opportunities to house hack without having anyone live inside your house or without sharing walls with somebody else. There's a few other things that I thought were really key, amazing ideas that Mason shared. The first one is only rent out a space that you would want to rent if you were a tenant. Okay, we don't want anyone living in some sort of rat hole and saying, hey, get over it. Okay, if you are willing to live there, then it is someplace that is worth renting. And real estate takes a ton of knowledge. So doing that research was another great takeaway that Mason gave us. The last takeaway that was so important was the tenant screening takeaway. I can sound pretty pessimistic about real estate because of the state I'm in right now with a couple of projects that have just not gone the way I want them to. But it really is a powerful tool for wealth generation as long as you have good tenants, and good tenants only come from good tenant screening. So don't rush it. Don't, be terrified that you have this payment you have to make, losing a few $100s on making another payment is way better than losing potentially thousands of dollars on a bad tenant. So cannot stress enough the importance of the tenant screening process. I didn't screen a tenant properly. I took their word for something that I shouldn't have not taken their word for. And I ended up having that tenant not pay me for a couple of months. Also my bad for not kicking them out sooner after I kicked them out. The eviction was very expensive. There were so many red flags for me that I didn't notice, but they were not a good tenant and they cost me a lot of money. So just keeping in mind that good tenant screening will prevent that. Good tenant screening will allow you to choose the right people instead of the wrong people. And it was a hard experience for me to learn, but I've learned that. I've learned it very well now, and I will not go through that same process again because I've got the wisdom. And if you listen to me instead of doing what I did and rushing the tenant screening process because I didn't want to lose a few extra more $100, you will have a much better experience in the long run if you decide to do real estate. And it's especially important when you're house hacking. You don't want to have some weirdo living next to you. So don't rush it. Take your time, follow your gut, and choose the right person, and you will have a great house hacking experience if that's what you want to do. Now, just want to remind all of you that as a teacher, you are already rich. Your wallet just needs to catch up.
Are you worried you won't have enough money to retire? Or maybe you just don't know how you're going to get out of all of this debt. Whatever your situation is, I can help you. Go to teachermoneyshow.com/guest and fill out the form there, and you can come on the show for free coaching, or we can meet one-on-one to discuss your needs. I look forward to talking to you.